I'm Carolyn, obviously, and there's a number of different roles that they just talked to you about that I'm in. I'm a clinical psychologist, I'm a research academic at Victoria University. I'm on loan from the university to the Western Bulldogs Community Foundation to manage research within the foundation there. I don't work in football, I don't know anything about football. And I do some work with the military as well. I'm in private practice, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to try and wrap some of those things together, and I'm going to flick back and forth between my different roles as I go. And I just wanted to talk today a little bit about, I'm going to move you from that really moving, that was a great talk, Dale, human example about working through mental health stigma, and from Luke in the leadership capacity. I'm going to start there and move over into some research and some looking at what the latest research is in mental health interventions. I'm happy to go wherever you want to go. And I'm also happy for you to put up your hand in the middle of my talk and stop me. Yeah. So I want to thank Luke and Dale for that really great talk, which is covering some of the things that I wanted to talk about. And it's really wonderful to hear a high-performance coach speak so openly about the integration of mental health care and resilience building into his leadership. And I was thinking that contrasts markedly with something that I saw a couple of weeks ago on a television show called The Front Bar. We were watching that, in which they're interviewing another Bulldogs hero, which was Bob Murphy, talking about his time there. And he talked about an incident in which he had been basically beaten up by one of his team members, and that team member was Luke Darcy, and they talked to him, and he said, we've already had a couple of references to our coach here, Rodney Eade, at the time, who kind of instructed him to basically start a fight with somebody on his own team at a training session. And the purpose of doing that was to kind of get people motivated, that the coach didn't think that they were like psychologically ramped up enough in order to perform very well. So what a way we've come in, what is that, like 15 years from where we have basically an environment in which we're using kind of physical assault in order to produce the psychological variable, to something far more caring and far more knowledgeable and evidence-based in the work that Luke is really doing. Yep. At first, I was watching that and I was thinking, wow, what kind of a horrible work environment would you be in which so you get physically assaulted in order to produce a psychological variable? And then I sort of remembered that I'd been working in an environment that did something like that for the past 20 years, so I shouldn't be so critical. In the army, we used to have this term which is called issuing cans of harden up. And what that means is that we understand, like our people understand, that there's a psychological variable which is resilience or hardiness or an ability to get through things, recover from things and move on. They just don't know how to manipulate that variable to get people back to being healthy and focused. And so if only it was as easy as issuing like a can of protein mix or something. They used to use this term which we would call contact counselling, or maybe performance counselling, or then it just kind of got shorted to counselling, which is you take somebody out the back and you give them a bit of a smack and then they'll perform better, which made it all very confusing once the army psychologists appear on the scene and start asking if they can do some counselling with some of the soldiers. What are you doing? We have a very different term for that. This is a really old photo of me. So you can sort of understand that mental health stigma has always existed in cultures that value hardiness or resilience. So they're like high performance cultures. They're usually engaged in physical tasks. They fear emotions because emotions run a gamut. They're kind of uncontrollable, and some of those emotions indicate weakness. We get that, and so those organisations understandably continue to struggle with mental health stigma, and we're all okay with that idea. But I think what we don't automatically understand is that mental health stigma is everywhere else. So we're human beings, and as human beings we're worried when somebody looks as if they're distressed. So if you tried to do like a literature review on different groups that have high mental health stigma, you have other high-risk occupations like elite athletes, you have people with perceived need for mental health care, high mental health care requirements, low mental health care requirements, young people, old people, men, mothers, people from Asian backgrounds, people from African backgrounds, people who play horror video gaming, I'm assuming that's what Luke was referring to before. So, you know, I don't think I think if you look at any particular group, you're going to be able to identify that they have a mental health stigma issue associated with them. And perhaps instead of trying to identify groups, we should just start assuming that mental health stigma is everywhere. And if you're going to implement an intervention that addresses mental health, it's going to have to be a mental health stigma reducing intervention. Does that make sense? Cool. I want to just quickly say that mental health stigma is only one barrier to care, and there are other far more practical ones. But mental health stigma is a barrier to care that universally affects everybody and really needs to be addressed. In fact, one of the things that we did that was most useful in the military is we started to implement a universal screening program. So anyone who deploys anywhere at any time has to go and see a psychologist after they return and sit down for 20 minutes. We don't care whether you're reporting any mental health problems or not, and that gets soldiers kind of used to the idea of just that seeing a psychologist for your care is kind of a regular thing. You do it all of the time, and you look after your mental health in the same way that you look after your physical health. You can go and see a GP. I think, you know, Luke's point about being in environments where these things are really easy because you can just tell people what to do and you have a lot of resources is a really valid point. And I think in the general population, we have difficulty getting people to go see a GP on a regular basis, let alone a mental health nurse or a professional in some respect. So how can we reduce barriers to care, especially mental health stigma, and build people's capacity for looking after their own mental health? That's things that I'm interested in. So today I just want to talk to you, I've just randomly chosen 3 things that are, firstly, evidence-based, resilience building mechanisms that have current lines of research inquiry into them. They're new, and people are getting excited about them today. And secondly, there's stigma reducing measures in their own right, as well as being mental health interventions. So first, the concept of treating the individual as a whole person rather than a combination of parts. So if you isolate somebody's mental health from the rest of their life, that naturally induces, exacerbates mental health stigma, because people start to think that this is a thing that I can take care of that's separate to the rest of my life, and I can take care of that in a specific way that's not related to anything else. And it also means that I might have this one little weak part of me that other people don't have. Many intervention studies in the past, I think, have suffered from isolating their outcome measures to mental health measures only, rather than the wider kind of social, vocational, sort of recreational, familial quality of life outcomes that we're starting to see in the literature now. And those are the things we're really trying to treat when we build mental health anyway. So why are we not starting to measure those things? Holistic interventions, I think, are the new black, because we like to see interventions that are warm, non-stigma inducing, interventions that increase the accessibility of the intervention and are capable of being delivered in the life of the person as opposed to in the treatment room. So that's all really good stuff, but what we now see is all kinds of activities that claim to be good for mental health. Forest bathing, have we read about this? Puppy therapy, I noticed the puppies went in to see Malcolm Turnbull a couple of months ago. Equine therapy, I constantly read about it because I move in a PTSD field and they're big there for some reason. Even yoga, arts-based approaches are really increasingly popular and getting written up in peer-reviewed journals. And I'm working in these fields. I work on a couple of different arts-based approaches. That's a choir. This is some research done at Victoria University on the choir and how that improves mental health. This is what we call the arts program with a double R. It's an intervention for military veterans. There's a number of streams. This is the performance one, there's a writing one, a music one. This is a really cute little intervention that they're doing at a school in Melbourne, which is the film producing intervention for culturally diverse children who are at risk of dropping out of school as they transition to high school and increasing their resilience. The results, there is some research that's being done on all of these interventions, but it's really, really early stuff. And they're nice approaches, but the evidence is really preliminary. What did I just do? I feel like I work deep within a community model in all of my practice. My private practice is located in an exercise physiology studio, like I'm into that kind of holistic approach. But I think we need to be cautious in our uptake of those therapies. The loudness of the media surrounding them sometimes means that we sort of overestimate their impact. For example, a great deal of practitioners would advocate some kind of mindfulness practice to their client. It is becoming kind of the ubiquitous thing that we do. The current literature reviews on mindfulness, however, say that it's under research. Many of the claims that it makes about mental health are not yet verified, and they might be in the future, but they're not yet. Limited work has been done looking at the contraindicators to the practice. There's growing and probably reliable evidence that mindfulness is not appropriate if you're vulnerable to psychosis. There's probably some maybe evidence that in high periods of severe anxiety that you might not be using it, and I think a lot of people are not trained in when it is appropriate to use and when not to. I have a colleague, Alexander Parker at Victoria University, who works in the mental health and physical activity space. So some of this work is hers that I'm going to show you. Although the link between mental health and physical exercise seems intuitive, it's not yet strongly proven in the literature. The current evidence suggests that the link might only apply to certain domains. So it's possible that in cases of depression, there's a really strong link, and in cases of anxiety, the link might not be there. So I think we need to get a bit more subtle about our understanding of it. So a good therapy is holistic. And there's lots of benefits to implementing whole-of-life change to improve mental health. But I think it's important that we are capable of distinguishing between the main therapy that has an evidence base to dealing with the chronic barrier to resilience and the adjunct therapy that assists the client to engage in the main therapy. Those adjunct therapies can both do two things. On the way in, they can smooth the way for the person to engage in the therapy, and on the way out, they can allow the therapy to have more of a holistic impact on the person's life. So I kind of think of the adjunct therapy as like the thing that reduces some of those barriers to care, but not necessarily the care itself. So you can have a cake and eat it too, but if the cake is limited in size, you need to think about how you're portioning that up. Should I answer any questions about holistic practice? Number two, technology-based interventions. I wanted to show you just a little bit of some new exciting work that is being conducted using technology. Referencing my last point, the use of technology in mental health is fun, it decreases barriers to care. I think there are important things to do about it. Some of the interventions actually augment the effects of the main therapy, but it probably is an augmentation device. And sometimes it becomes a more expensive one. So the treatment gap in mental health care is pervasive. There are certain people in Australia who get treatment and certain people based solely on their demographics who don't. For example, psychological care outside of urban areas is shockingly low. There are just those mental health practitioners do not exist. This is going to be one of the urgent public mental health tasks for us to address in the next decade, and you'll see more funding get put into trying to work out what to do with it. So the natural thing to suggest in the age of the NBN is for an online-based mental health care, right? There are a number of trials around now to address e-therapy or e-mental health interventions. At the moment, many of them are, the level of quality of the trial is low at the moment. This is a Cochrane review which suggests that e-therapy is more effective than no treatment, and it might possibly have equivalence to in-person treatment itself if there is a therapist at the other end doing the work. That is, the mental health practitioner still needs to exist somewhere at the other end of the line, so we're not into treatment via avatar just yet. I've still got a job for a few years. I think that a lot of practitioners at the moment are kind of reluctant to engage in e-therapy stuff because the models of training that we have as mental health practitioners have not trained us in doing this work. Like, a lot of the training that you get is based on sitting in a room with a person, and so that's what we're most comfortable in doing. But I think those curriculum models will change in the future, and you will start to see mental health practitioners being trained in the use of, e-therapy, e-technology, technology to do things. And I think that we should encourage people who are trying to do some work with that. So I talked about avatars. I don't think we're quite there yet. But we have moved into the virtual reality space. A number of practitioners, including, this is Barbara Rothbauer herself at Emory University in the United States, and she's got a really massive research program. They're looking at the use of virtual reality to treat a range of mental health problems. So who's seen this work before? So she's got a lot of funding from Veterans Affairs. So the first thing that they were looking at was the focus of treatment on military-related PTSD. And PTSD requires an exposure to the feared situation. And so in veterans, that's a really hard thing to simulate. Our traditional treatment for trauma is to ask the client to close their eyes, to recount the story, to try and imagine that they're there, try and invoke the senses in the hope that it's going to feel real for them, and then you start to work on their relationship with that story and the cognitions involved. Virtual reality allows the client to have the experience of being fully immersed in the situation. So if you were to look at a photograph, you get an idea of what that place looks like. If you were there, you might have a slight memory of what was going on at the time, but you don't feel fully immersed and actually there in the situation. And when we use virtual reality, it allows us to have that, like a flood of contextual cues that allow us to feel the sense of what it is like to be there. One of the difficulties also that we have with exposure treatments in PTSD is like getting the client to, go use their memory to go back into that experience, because it's a really difficult one for them. So virtual reality is a way that we can sort of gently push our clients into being there and doing the work. I'm showing a picture of a room here because, the most common activating event for PTSD in American soldiers, sexual assault by another US soldier. And so once you start working in military-related PTSD in the US, then obviously you start to move into like the treatment of sexual assault. And so we have a room here. You don't show the perpetrator, you just show the room that the person is in. You can simulate the door being open, the door being closed, the sound of the door being closed behind you, the things that were really scary at the time, in order to do that exposure work. And so once they had some really awesome results in doing that, they've moved on to a whole range of other things in the use of virtual reality. So we'll look at phobias. So here's a person standing up really high on a bridge, and so when you have the virtual reality thing on, you can actually just stand, you can look down, you get that kind of physiological cue for it. You can do some exposure work for that. You can do a public speaking exposure. So if I want to go back and relive the exciting nervous energy that I'm feeling speaking to you today, then I can kind of use my virtual reality to do that. And one of the things that they can do with virtual reality that I can't do here is I can dial up and down the hostility or the scariness of the audience. and stop them from laughing at my crappy jokes, and make them much more serious. Or you can do a job interview situation. You can do all kinds of things. You can do. They have a aeroplane simulation. They have substance abuse is not an anxiety disorder, but the treatment is kind of related in that you work on the person's relationship with the substance, and once we've done some initial work on that, we're trying to do some exposure to situations in which you would be offered the substance. And so now we can use virtual reality to do that. This is the person at the bar, there are some cigarettes on the bar, you can have a party, people offering you alcohol, they have a virtual reality crack den in case you want to go in, hang out. I think the possibilities are kind of endless. And I think that the use of virtual reality at the moment is slightly expensive, but it could continue. The cost of technology is continuing to fall. I'm showing you this stuff because I think in the very near future you guys are going to see practitioners who are selling these things to the general public and to your clients. The Emory University crew has some really amazing data which shows that these things do work. But I want to remind you that they're doing them in the context of a treatment, with a range of clinical psychologists and other mental health practitioners. They're doing the main work first, and they're using the virtual reality as an augmentation of the main work. And I've seen enough kind of scary reenactment play things being schlepped around for PTSD to be really wary that there is a main treatment as well as the augmentation of it. Third one, family-focused or community-embedded practice. There is definitely growing evidence that social factors have a strong impact on mental health. So we know that the stabilisation of the family is going to assist in the mental health treatment of the individual. That's not rocket surgery. There's also a growing push for consumers these days for the treatment programs to consider their wishes and the wishes of their family, rather than have some expert professional making a decision about what the treatment is going to involve. So you see these two things meet in the middle with a framework that has different names. It's variously called family-focused or family-friendly or community-embedded in practice. And I think there's basically just two parts to it. Firstly, there's the provision of instrumental and emotional support to the family. So many people with mental health concerns come from families that also have mental health difficulties in them. By stabilising the family environment, you provide a support base for the person to recover. So what that includes is the assessment of the family members' functioning, referrals for the family members, and because if some number of people don't have that family support around them, an increase in the social connectedness of the person, and if they have limited number of family members, of the family members as well. Secondly, it involves the inclusion of the family as a stakeholder in the planning and the goal setting. So you bringing them in when you're starting to do the goal setting for the individual person. And that involves a psychoeducation and an increase in mental health literacy for everybody who is surrounding the person. And I think that, Luke was trying to say some of these things in his talk about if you have a player who has difficulties, you also need to educate the entire group that's around him about what that difficulty is and how the recovery process is going to go. Otherwise, those people don't know how to support that person. And so you have the same thing happen in the families that you work with as well. In our universal military screening, we make the offer for any family member to attend, and we can show kind of really great results in terms of the mental health literacy and the understanding about mental health that goes on there. Social interventions kind of break down the stigma that mental health needs to be addressed by a single person in isolation, in a clinical room, in a hospital. It encourages people, and especially obviously men we're interested in because of their hard to reach nature, to discuss mental health openly and be supportive of each other. So there's lots of programs now that attempt to incorporate some kind of community element into healthcare. Often we think about maybe the Men's Shed movement. Men's Shed is what I would call a shoulder-to-shoulder approach to social networking, which is that you're standing next to the person and doing a thing with the person. We're not directly intervening in the mental health issue or addressing that or even talking about it with them, but we understand that there's some kind of byproduct of doing the thing together with another person that is going to help. And I think that the Men's Shed, there's not that much research into it actually. This is Barry Golding's work at Federation University, where the men say, yeah, look, it helped me and I made more friends and I feel a little bit better, but that's really kind of preliminary work. So the work we do at the Foundation in our Sons of the West and now our Daughters of the West Health Promotion Program is what we would call a face-to-face intervention, because we intentionally ask the participants to engage with each other in a different context to what they're used to in terms of the discussion about emotive topics. And we provide, in order to stimulate that, we intentionally include lived experience material into the health promotion that we do to kind of provide a role modelling about how this is how you have conversations about really difficult mental health issues. And now you guys have got time to talk about that yourself. So it's the difference between like a shoulder-to-shoulder or a face-to-face intervention. So we've got a couple of papers in submission published at the moment. Our initial findings suggest that the social engagement element is actually the thing that is probably increasing resilience in these people, which we kind of understood, that we kind of expected from the research previously anyway. Some of the other things that we're finding in our qualitative work is that it involves a breaking down of mental health stigma. So we have higher rates of participants who volunteer to go into, we link our health promotion program to some psychological care programs, and we have really high rates of men volunteering, proactively asking to go into those mental health care programs, purely on the basis, we think, of what has been done within the health promotion program to break down that stigma. We have men suggesting that the type of social environment that they exist in, that occurs in the health promotion program is different to the friendships that they have in other areas of their life because of that. So hopefully we can continue to do some research in there. We're currently putting together a grant proposal for that. I think that's it. I think that's the end of my slide deck. So that's the intention, was to just provide you with a short, quick journey through a couple of things that people are talking about in the research today that you're probably going to come across in the work that you do with clients. As a summary, mental health interventions that work are necessarily stigma-reducing interventions, and you should look out for that. But they also build on a solid evidence base, so you shouldn't be too distracted by the shiny new buttons that are on the coat. And they incorporate a sense of the client as like a holistic person with a team of people behind him as well. That's it from me. Tell me what questions you've got.
So we've got some roaming mics, if anybody does have some questions.
Carolyn, I guess one question is, we saw the VR technology. Is that something we can use for, say, bullying and harassment and interpersonal conflict, where we know that people, that's sort of a barrier to their treatment or to them recovering, is that they just are getting hung up on certain situations like that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Yes, I do, because I think some of the work that we would do in situations of bullying and harassment is a role play, work about how to approach those situations. And yeah, once you start to fear a situation, then you avoid it more. And so that's a way of being able to, do that. It's a great idea. Let's ask them to write a nasty co-worker simulation for us.
Any more questions for Carolyn?
You spoke a little bit about exercise and the sort of growing trend around exercise and how important that is around prevention and treatment. What about sleep and diet as well? That seems to be a growing trend and growing discussion around that as well.
Yeah, I do think there's a lot of discussion around sleep at the moment, and diet and gut health, and especially I think that the medication companies have decided that sleep is something that they can target as well, and so you see melatonin and things like that being sort of marketed to people as sort of, I don't know what they're trying to do. I think they're trying to market them as sort of soft medication interventions, that like the drug you have when you're not taking a drug. And I think there's probably a lot of solid evidence that your sleep affects your mental health directly, and most people are not very good at monitoring their sleep. And so there are a lot of really great insomnia interventions, like therapy-based insomnia interventions that you can do. It's probably the sleep stuff is, at the moment, has a greater evidence base than physical activity. But I think we've potentially overlooked researching physical activity, because all of us have just thought it's just, naturally, it's definitely going to help. So we sort of jumped that, and now we're going back to saying, let's do that. Does that sort of answer the question? Yeah, I think those are definitely things to look out for. Yeah, hi.
Yeah, hi. You talked about mental stigma. Is this evidence and research in relation to obviously age groups, gender and all that sort of stuff over the years that you can present to us, like in terms of mental stigma and their people's approach, I suppose, their perception of that? Around that?
In terms of like what groups are more susceptible to stigma. So, I think I just covered some of that in my talk, but I spent a long part of my career working with high performance occupations, emergency services and the military, in which we have always thought, we're a special population, and that we've got a lot of stigma around mental health and help-seeking behaviours. And then I've moved into this men's health field, in which I'm like, so obviously men have got a mental health stigma about them, don't they? And I just, I think at a certain point, if you have a look at any group, I also did, my PhD is in maternal and child health in perinatal mental health, looking at mums with postnatal depression. And there's a stack of stigma relating to the concept of having depression when you're a mother. My mums will say to me, if I admit that I've got depression, then there's another, I've got one job right now, and that's to be a mum, and if you tell me I'm depressed, then I'll have failed at that job as well. So I'm not going to go there. And there is a lot of barriers to care in that as well. So I've worked in enough situations in my life where I'm like, how about we just assume everybody has their own particular flavour of mental health stigma, and we should work on what are the things that we are doing as practitioners to reduce those barriers, or as create enablers or pathways to care. That's a key job of ours.